Well, this morning's sermon text, and by the way, I'll remind you that we have that insert right here. We call it sermon notes, and if you'd like to take a few notes during my message, please do so. You might even want to write down a question for me and ask me later on. I'll be here for a while. The sermon text this morning that I have reprinted is chapter 4 in Exodus. And for the first four chapters in the book, we really focus in on Moses. You remember Moses, don't you? He's the guy who received the Ten Commandments. A lot of people today would like you to think it's the 10 suggestions. When I was preparing this, I don't know why it came to me, but I remembered watching Larry the Cable Guy. Remember him? He does those Prilosec commercials. Yeah. And in one of his monologues, he talked about the real reason why we can't have the 10 Commandments posted in a courthouse or in a judge's chambers. You just can't have the 10 Commandments there anymore. And he said the reason why is because it says, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, and thou shalt not lie. And when you have a building full of lawyers and judges and politicians, it creates a hostile work environment. There's a lot of truth in that. Let's get back to the book of Exodus. And again, this is really more than a story about Moses and the Ten Commandments. This is our assurance that God fulfills all of His promises. This is the story of redemption. This is the story of how God takes a nation of people and leads them out of slavery into freedom. When you begin reading the first chapter, it's a reminder that the Israelites lived in Egypt. And they started out, they had a really good situation, and then it turned bad. There was a change in administrations. And with the new administration, they became slaves. And they went from being blessed to being beaten. And then when you move into chapter 2, we're introduced to Moses. I call it the early years. His first 40 years as a young person. And he was a prince. And one day he saw some Pharaoh's guards beating one of his own people. And he was enraged, and he decided he would take care of it. He would take justice into his own hands, and he killed the Egyptian guard, and then he had to flee for his life. And then when you get to chapter 3, this is the story of Moses and the next 40 years. All right? God's ready to do a great work, a great miracle for the people of Israel. And you read about Moses meeting up with God, and we read a little bit of that in our reading this morning, that he came across a burning bush, and it was an amazing sight. And God spoke to him and said, "Take off your shoes, Moses. This place is holy." Did you know that, by the way, did you know that when Alexander Graham Bell, when he invented the telephone, do you know he wanted us to answer the phone with the words, "Hoi, hoi"? Aren't you glad that that didn't go over too well, and today you just say hello? In chapter 3, verse 4, we have an account of God calling out to Moses, and he doesn't say, "Hoi, hoi." Here's what really happened. When the Lord saw that he had caught Moses' attention, God called to him from the bush. And he said, "Moses, Moses." And chapter 4 is all about Moses now. And how God calls him to a new job. Only it isn't that Moses is out of work. You see, the second 40 years of his life, he's already been gainfully employed. He's working for his father-in-law. He's a shepherd. He's married. He's happy. There's peace. But God has something for him to do. It's kind of a promotion. God's about to offer Moses a job that God has been planning for him since the beginning of time. And Moses is about to find out that his 40 years of being a shepherd in the wilderness, working for his father-in-law, it was meant for his good. Well, with all that said, let's begin. And my first point I have is that he's a needed employee. Verse 2. Then the Lord asked him, "What do you have in your hand?" "A shepherd's staff," Moses replied. So here we have God, and he has chosen Moses to be sort of his right-hand man in this project that he has for him, this position. He's God's new employee. And I want you to think with me for a moment. God has picked Moses for a special assignment. God could easily have worked a miracle without him. Friends, the Almighty did not need Moses. God could have allowed Moses to just live out his life as a shepherd with his wife and his father-in-law and into his golden years, and he could have been buried out in that wilderness, and we never would have even read about him in the Bible. God didn't need Moses. God could have easily gone to the Egyptians and worked a great miracle all by himself and freed the people. God doesn't need us. He doesn't need you for church work. But he wants to use you. And he wanted to use Moses. I guess we need to realize that. You know, sometimes we think we're indispensable in church work. Church will never survive without us. Oh, yes, it will. God hasn't changed. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that this God who can speak the word and mountains will move and rain clouds will appear and fire will erupt and bushes will burn without being destroyed, this God would rather use ordinary folk to do extraordinary things. Aren't you glad? So God speaks to Moses. What do you have in your hand? This is God's way of saying to mankind, I know that you're lacking some confidence. I know that you've memories of the past and you can point a finger at times when you failed and you just weren't up to the job, and I know all that. But saying no is not an option. And I can use you. In fact, Moses, if you say yes to me, I will use you and I will show you things you could not even begin to dream of. When God asked Moses, "What's in your hand?" he was saying, "Moses, I have a job for you. I'm going to give you all the help that you need. I'm going to be right by your side. You'll have all the tools necessary." That is what being a Christian is all about. Serving here at Dearborn Congregational Church. We look around and our numbers are a little slim today. But listen, God can use us. We can accomplish great things for him. We can be a blessing to others. Thousands of years ago, a guy by the name of Moses is asked to step out of his comfort zone, his security zone, his safe zone. And he's asked to push the envelope regarding his faith in God. He's asked to do a job that Moses is certain he can't do. Hello, neighbor. Come on over here. Give me a hug. Donna Johnson spoke these words to her future next-door neighbor who was just moving in, a new family in the neighborhood. And the women, they got together, they introduced themselves, and they learned that Donna's nephew and her new neighbor's son were about the same age. They decided that they would become friends, that they would see each other frequently. That's a nice way to move in and meet with good people. Donna Johnson had quite a story. She was divorced, single mom. At one time she lived alone because she was a drug addict. She hit her low point in February 1991. She sat at the end of her mother's driveway. She looked out at the freeway and she contemplated suicide. In a desperate moment, she looked up to the heavens and she cried out to God. And she said, Lord, if you will just help me, I promise that I will do 3 things for you. Just deliver me from this addiction. She promised she would serve God to the very best of her ability, that she would be the very best mother that she could be, and that she would work for God and be a friend to any and all who came her way. So Donna checked into a rehab center, and she started over. And today she's clean, and she has a small home, and she has her children back. The courts had taken them away. And she's working at a job for God, a job God had given to her, filled with God's grace and strength. Now she's a friend to people, to strangers. She's a hugging kind of person. She smiles, and no one is a stranger around Donna. And that was her calling. When I pastored in Romulus, we had a hugger, remember? Yes. We had a dear little old lady, and that was her ministry. You could not walk through the doors of the church without getting a hug and a smile. She loved everyone. And not just at the church, where she lived, at the senior center, when she was out shopping. She would just hug you, and that was her ministry. What's in your hand? What can you do for God? If you're willing to step out of your comfort zone, God can use you even in the smallest of ways to bring Him honor and to bring Him glory. And don't give me an excuse either, because there is no excuse. God asked Moses, what's in your hand? And Moses says, God, I've got a shepherd's staff. Now, put yourself in Moses' shoes. What was he thinking when he answered God, I've got this shepherd's staff? He was probably saying, take a good look at me. I'm a shepherd. I'm not a prince in Egypt any longer. I've got these very humble clothes on. My address has changed. I don't live in a palace now. I'm just a shepherd. I'm nothing. I'm not very important. I take care of my father-in-law's sheep. I think if we use our imagination, we can relate to Moses. I mean, we have all been there. We've had that moment when we are challenged to accept some responsibility to do a job, and we make excuses. In the first few chapters of Exodus, we have listed for us all of the excuses that Moses offers God. When God first calls, Moses answers in verse 11 of chapter 3. And he says this, who am I to appear before Pharaoh? How can you expect me to lead the Israelites out of Egypt? And God assures Moses, hey, listen, hang in there. I will help you. But just a couple verses later, Moses offers more excuses. If I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they won't believe me. They will ask, which God are you talking about? What is his name? And then what should I tell them? And God has an answer for Moses. Just tell them, I am the one who always is. I like Eugene Peterson's translation of all this. It reads like this. God speaking to Moses. I am who I am. Tell the people of Israel, I am sent you. This is what you're to say. God, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, sent me to you. This has always been my name, and this is how I always will be known. Wow. Moses was probably thinking, I should never have offered an excuse and not saying yes to God. And this is God's way of assuring a man that he would not only be with him, God would not only be with Moses, but he would guide him and help him, and he would even provide a miracle so that he would succeed. A miracle that would allow Moses to do something he could not do for himself. Now this should have been enough, right? I mean, but Moses isn't convinced. First, he argues that he's only a shepherd. No qualifications for this job. God instructs Moses to throw down the shepherd's staff. You remember that Bible account? He throws down the staff turns into a snake, and then he reaches and he grabs the end of the snake and it turns back into his staff. Now right there, that would have convinced me that God's going to help me. Doesn't work. And so then Moses instructs God to put his hand in his robe. He does, takes it out. It's full of leprosy. And then he's told, put it back in, pulls it out, and it's clean again. Now that's quite a miracle. They're going back and forth, and Moses is not convinced. Don't ask me why. And finally, he runs out of excuses, and he says to God in verse number 13, Lord, send somebody else. Excuses. Boy, aren't we good at offering excuses? I remember when I was pastoring another church, and I won't tell you which one, but we had a need for a Sunday school teacher. And the superintendent of the Sunday school classes said, Pastor, would you contact this person? And I did. And after I shared with them how I thought that they were very talented and they could certainly teach Sunday school, I think it was for the teenage years, I remember them saying to me, well, let me pray about it. Ha! Let me pray about it. You know what that means? That's code for, I don't have an excuse to say no to you, Pastor. So let me pray about it, and then God gets the, right? And sure enough, a week later, she called me back, and she said, well, I'm sorry, I have to turn you down. I'm just so busy, and really, I just don't think I would do a very good job. If she had said, let me think about it, I would have been encouraged. Because that tells me she's taking on responsibility. She's going to think about whether or not she'll do the job. And then if she had said, no, I can't, I would have understood. But when she said, I'll pray about it, it was all over. I'm thinking about our annual congregational meeting is coming up. Amen. We're going to have some jobs to fill. Pete can't do everything. Because I'm thinking about asking him to preach just to see. But he can't do everything. You may be challenged to accept a position. You may be asked to do something. Are you going to offer an excuse? Are you going to say, let me pray about it? If God tugs at your heart, and you sense it's him, and he's saying, you can do this. Don't make any excuses. And then I have this third point. I call it never empty. Look at verse 8. God speaks to Moses. If they do not believe the first miraculous sign, they will believe the second. And verse 9. And if they do not believe you, even after these signs, then take some water from the Nile River, pour it on the dry ground. When you do it, it will turn into blood. Again, all these miraculous signs, shepherd's staff being turned into a snake, then back into a piece of wood, a hand stricken with leprosy and then made clean again. And then God tells Moses he's going to turn water into blood. Really, what the message is for today's church, the message is don't shortchange God. He is never empty when it comes to helping. He's never short on miracles. I remember months ago when we were looking at our parking lot and we had to have it fixed and we were wondering, where is the money going to come from? And now it's paid for. And we didn't have to use a penny of our general fund money. It came in with gifts, and one miraculous gift. I mean, we serve a God of the impossible. The well never runs dry. God is never empty. Nothing is too hard for God. Do you believe that? Well, there are times when God is challenged. One day, Adam is talking to God, and he asked the Lord, God, I've been wondering, why did you make Eve so pretty? She's got great skin, beautiful blonde hair, charming personality. And God replies, because I wanted you to like her. And then Adam asks God, I do, but God, why did you make her blonde? I mean, she can really be ditzy at times. And God answered, because I wanted her to like you. That's in Genesis. God has an answer for every question. He has a promise for every endeavor, and he has a blessing for anyone who will take the talent that you've been blessed with and use it. God asked Moses in verse 2, what do you have in your hand? That's a question that he has been asking for generation to generation to generation. Men and women, from Exodus right up to November the 13th, 2016, God is still asking that same question. He might be asking that this morning to some of you. What do you have in your hand? What talent do you have? What job will you do in the church? What job will you do outside of the church? In being a witness and a disciple and a follower of Jesus Christ. Amen.